The Book of Three. The Unknown One's Record of Colin, Mr. Wildticker, and the Life They Tried to Own. By Mr. C. P. Head. Copyright symbol 2026 Mr. C. P. Head. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior written permission from the author, except for brief quotations in reviews or critical articles. This is a work of creative nonfiction or literary memoir based on lived experience and interpretation. Names, dialogue, and certain details may be altered for narrative and privacy purposes. For the ones who kept going when the truth got ugly. Acknowledgements. This book did not arrive cleanly. It came out of pressure, memory, anger, survival, and the stubborn refusal to let other people write the story for me. I want to thank the people who have listened without trying to smooth the edges off the truth, the people who have stood still long enough to hear what is actually being said, and the people who understood that survival is not always quiet, neat, or polite. I also want to acknowledge the parts of myself that kept showing up when it would have been easier to disappear. Colin, for the caution. Mr. Wildticker, for the refusal. And the Unknown One, for remaining long enough to tell it properly. Contents. Prologue. Introduction. Where the book started. 1. The Stone Body. 2. Colin's Law. 3. Mr. Wildticker's Teeth. 4. The Unknown One Speaks. 5. Safety with Teeth in It. 6. The Argument. 7. The People Who Decide. 8. The Body Keeps Score. 9. The Public Face. 10. The Things They Call Love. 11. The Refusal. 12. What Remains. 13. The One Who Writes. Prologue. He was never meant to sound polite about this. That was the first mistake people made, assuming truth would arrive dressed properly, say please and thank you, and wait patiently while they decided whether they were in the mood to hear it. It won't. Truth arrives already annoyed, carrying a record of what happened, and if that makes anyone uncomfortable then good. Discomfort is often the first honest reaction in the room. There were 3 of him, which is already more than most people can handle without trying to simplify it into something tidy and useless. Colin was the one who built the walls. Not because he enjoyed architecture, but because he had learned that some people only behave when they are kept outside. He was cautious with a pulse. He did not trust quickly, did not open easily, and did not confuse silence with weakness. He knew too much for that. He had seen too much, listened too carefully, and remembered enough to make optimism look embarrassing. Mr. Wildticker was the opposite problem. He was the part that looked at hypocrisy, laughed in its face, and then told it to fuck off in language it could understand. He did not polish things to make them more palatable. He stripped them down. If something was rotten, he called it rotten. If someone was lying, he treated them like they had already been caught in the act. Manners were not his priority. Accuracy was. And then there was the Unknown One. Not the hero. Not the peacekeeper. Not the noble center of some ridiculous healing journey where everyone learns a valuable lesson and the credits roll. No. He was the one left holding the mess after the first 2 had finished doing what they do best. He watched. He kept notes. He counted the cost. He knew when caution had turned into a prison and when rage had become another kind of trap. He was not interested in speeches. He was interested in what was true when the performance stopped. He watched them both. He watched the damage. He watched the habits. He watched the way fear dressed itself up as wisdom and the way anger sometimes confused itself for freedom. He was the one who had to live with the consequences. That is what makes him dangerous. Not the rage. Not the fear. The fact that he remembers. And memory, unlike most people, does not lie to spare anyone's feelings. Dark line. Some stories do not begin with hope. They begin with damage that has finally had enough of being quiet. Introduction. This is not a story about becoming whole. That would be far too neat, far too marketable, and far too kind to the facts. This is a story about division that became survival, survival that became identity, an identity that refused to stay quiet once it had learned the cost of silence. It is about the shape of a life lived under pressure, where trust was expensive, control was common, and being misunderstood was often the price of staying alive. The Unknown One tells it because he is the one left when the shouting stops. He does not excuse Colin. He does not apologize for Mr. Wildticker. He does not ask the reader to like either of them. He only insists that they are all real, and that if you have ever tried to survive people who think they know you better than you know yourself, then you already understand the problem. Dark line. The truth does not need permission. It only needs someone left standing to say it. Where the book started. Chapter. No more middle ground. Let's stop pretending this is manageable. There are 3 of us, and it is not balanced, not peaceful, and definitely not healthy in the way people like to package things up and nod at. It's a fight. It's always been a fight. Colin stands at the back, arms folded, calm as ever, watching everything like he's already seen how it ends. I have, he'd say, if you asked him. That's the point. Of course it is. Colin doesn't panic. He predicts. Every risk mapped out, every outcome pre-lived before it even happens. He doesn't need to raise his voice because his power comes from certainty. You step forward, you get cut down. You trust them, they turn. You speak, they twist it. And the worst thing? He says it like fact, not fear, which makes him hard to argue with, but not impossible. That's where I come in. Mr. Wildticker. And I'm done entertaining his careful little prison. Say it properly, I snap at him. You don't want safety, you want control. Colin doesn't react. Of course he doesn't. He just tilts his head slightly, like I've proven his point for him. Control keeps us alive. No, I fire back, it keeps us contained. And that's when he looks past me. Because I'm not the problem anymore. Not the main one. The real problem, the one he didn't see coming, is the third voice. Because he's not standing quietly between us now. He's stepped forward. And he looks furious. Not explosive like me. Not cold like Colin. Worse. Measured. But done. You've both had your turn, he says. That lands wrong immediately. Colin narrows his eyes slightly. I grin, because finally, this is going somewhere worth listening to. You kept us hidden, he says, looking straight at Colin. And you, now he turns to me, sharp as anything. You'd happily blow everything up just to prove you're not scared. I open my mouth to argue. He cuts straight across me. No, you don't get to dress it up as truth. Half the time you're just angry and looking for somewhere to put it. That hits. Harder than Colin ever manages. Because Colin argues from logic. This one? He's been watching. Learning. And he's not wrong. I laugh anyway, because that's what I do. Better angry than silent. Better controlled than reckless, Colin adds smoothly. And just like that, they're both talking at him. At him. Like he's still the middle. Still the one who absorbs it. Still the one who bends. Big mistake. Shut up. Both of you. That does it. Silence. Proper silence. Because he's never said it like that before. No hesitation. No soft edge. No attempt to keep things calm. Just a full stop. You don't get it, he says, quieter now, but worse somehow. I'm the one who pays for this. Colin watches him carefully. He stops smiling. I'm the one who walks out there, he continues. I'm the one who deals with the people, the fallout, the consequences of both of you pulling in opposite directions like this is some kind of game. It's not a game, Colin says. No, he snaps back. It's a life. Mine. That word hangs there. Mine. Not ours. Mine. And that shifts everything. Because Colin's whole identity is built on we survive. Mine is built on we don't take shit. But his? He's claiming ownership. And neither of us can override that. You don't get to lock me away because you're scared, he says to Colin. I'm not scared. I'm informed. You're terrified, he shoots back. You've just had more time to justify it. That one cuts deep. You can see it. Even Colin feels that. Then he turns to me. And you don't get to hijack everything every time it feels unfair. I raise an eyebrow. Unfair? Try controlled. Try manipulated. Try. I know what it is, he cuts in. I feel it too. But you don't get to burn everything every time you feel it. So what? We just sit back and take it. I push. No, he says, stepping closer now. Proper presence. No backing off. We choose when it matters. That word again. Choose. Not react. Not retreat. Choose. And suddenly this isn't chaos anymore. It's something sharper. More dangerous. Because now there are lines. Colin crosses his arms tighter. And when your choice goes wrong, it will, he says, flat. That's the cost. And you're willing to pay it. He doesn't even hesitate. Yes. That's what neither of us were prepared for. Colin avoids risk. I ignore it. But him. He accepts it. That's a different kind of power entirely. Because now when Colin starts, this isn't safe. He gets shut down. I didn't ask for safe. And when I start, then let's tear into it, let's. I get shut down too. I didn't ask for chaos either. And there it is. No middle ground. No compromise. Just a line drawn by someone who's finally realized he doesn't belong to either of us. I decide, he says. Not fear. Not anger. Me. And this time, neither of us argues. Because for the first time, we both know. He means it. And worse. He's strong enough to follow through. Which means Colin's losing control. And I'm losing dominance. And him. He's done being pulled apart. Now he's the one pulling the direction. And whether we like it or not, we are going with him. Chapter 1. The Stone Body. He looked at the image and did not see art. He saw evidence. A man made of cracked stone. 3 faces. 1 body. Seated like a monument to bad decisions, survival, and whatever else had been smashed into shape and left there because nobody could be bothered to finish the job. People love this sort of image because it lets them pretend they understand fracture without having to live inside it. They stand there and admire the symbolism. Very tasteful. Very profound. Meanwhile, the actual human being that inspired it has had to drag himself through years of being interpreted by idiots, managed by strangers, and corrected by people who mistook control for concern. That is where Colin lives. Colin is the one who studies the exits before the conversation has even started. He knows exactly how much of himself to show and exactly how fast to disappear if the room turns poisonous. People call that guarded. As if guardedness appears out of nowhere like a personality quirk. No. Guardedness is what happens when trust has repeatedly behaved like a knife. He does not want applause. He wants distance. He wants the possibility of being left alone by people who say they are helping while clearly making a mess of it. Mr. Wildticker lives in the cracks Colin leaves behind. He is not subtle about it. He does not do measured response. He does not spend much time wondering whether the room is comfortable for people who have spent their lives making other people uncomfortable first. He sees control and calls it control. He sees pretense and calls it pretense. He sees the soft language of manipulation and treats it like the insult it is. Mr. Wildticker doesn't just dislike lies. He has the kind of contempt for them that comes from recognizing them instantly, like a smell you can't wash out of your hands. And then there is the unknown one. He is the one who gets left behind to look at the damage after Colin has shut the door and Mr. Wildticker has kicked it in. He is not impressed by either strategy, which probably makes him the least popular of the 3. That is unfortunate for everyone else, because he is also the one who can see the pattern. He sees how safety gets sold as if it were kindness. He sees how being managed gets called support. He sees how people decide what your life means before they have the decency to ask what it actually feels like to live it. He watches all of it and keeps the receipt. The cracked stone figure in the image makes sense to him because he understands what that kind of damage costs. It takes repeated pressure to split something that cleanly. It takes years of being handled badly. Years of being expected to survive, adapt, comply, and smile as if none of it has left a mark. And still it sits there. Still intact enough to be recognized. Still broken enough to be honest. That is the trick nobody likes admitting. A person can be badly fractured and still not fall apart. Some of them stay upright out of sheer irritation. He looked at the figure and knew exactly what it was. Not a symbol of healing. A record of what survived. Dark line. Some people think they are looking at a statue. They are actually looking at what happens when damage refuses to lie down. Chapter 2. Colin's Law. Colin believed in rules the way some men believe in fences. If the boundary is strong enough, maybe the danger stays outside. If the system is strict enough, maybe the pain cannot get in. If the behavior is controlled tightly enough, maybe nothing humiliating will happen again. It made sense, which was the problem. He was not stupid. He was not weak. He was disciplined by consequence. He knew what happened when you trusted the wrong person. He knew what happened when people decided your story for you. He knew that once the wrong hands had enough of your life, they would use it to claim authority over the rest. So he tightened everything. Speech, distance, exposure, hope. Hope was especially suspicious. The unknown one could hear him thinking before he spoke, could see the calculation running in the background like a machine that never really shut off. Colin was always asking one question: what is the safest possible version of this decision? But the safest version is not always the truest one. And sometimes safe is just a respectable name for fear that has learned to stand properly. Colin wasn't trying to ruin anything. That would require imagination. He was trying to prevent ruin from happening again. The trouble was that the method he used did not make much distinction between danger and living. To Colin, both could be risky. Both could be messy. Both could lead to pain. So he narrowed the field until the world barely had room to breathe. He treated uncertainty like a threat. He treated privacy like a shield. He treated silence like discipline. The unknown one understood why. That did not make it a good plan. It just made it a familiar one. Colin had survived by being hard to read, hard to corner, and hard to manipulate. Fine. Excellent. Useful, even. But if you keep running the same defensive code for long enough, eventually it stops protecting you and starts deciding for you. That was the problem. Colin's law had become law because nobody had bothered to challenge it for years. Stay small. Stay alert. Stay unseen. Stay out of reach. And if that looks like a life, congratulations. You've mistaken containment for peace. The unknown one knew the cost of Colin's caution because he had paid it. Every time Colin chose distance, something else was sacrificed. Chance, connection, risk, honesty, a bit of the world. He was not wrong to be careful. He was wrong to think caution should be permanent. Dark line. Colin did not build walls because he hated people. He built them because he had met people. Chapter 3. Mr. Wildticker's teeth. Mr. Wildticker did not negotiate with nonsense. He met it in the street and kicked it in the ribs. He was the voice that laughed at polite cruelty. The one who knew every smooth sentence could hide a trap. The one who understood that manipulation often wore a better suit than honesty. He did not trust appearances because appearances had lied too often and too confidently. He was the part that said, "No, fuck off," when everyone else was reaching for a diplomatic phrasing. He was not interested in being likable. He was interested in being accurate. That came with a cost. People prefer anger when it is decorative. They prefer it in stories, in songs, in entertainment. They do not like it when it points at them. Then it becomes intense, unhelpful, difficult, a problem. The labels arrive fast once your rage stops being convenient. Mr. Wildticker knew that. He wore the labels like badges and treated them as proof of work done correctly. He did not care much for social polish because social polish was usually where the lies were hiding. He had no time for people who wanted the benefits of honesty without the inconvenience of actually telling any. He could smell the fake concern, the false warmth, the strategic kindness. It all had a distinctive stink once you'd been around enough of it. Colin hated the damage he could cause. The unknown one respected the clarity he brought. The rest of the world, naturally, would rather he shut his mouth and become manageable. That told you everything you needed to know. Mr. Wildticker was not raging for the sake of being loud. He was enraged with a job to do. He tore holes in the polite wallpaper and made people look at the mold underneath. He was rude because the alternatives had failed. He was aggressive because passive politeness had been used against him too many times. Some people think calmness is always maturity. That is adorable. Calmness can just as easily be surrender dressed in better clothes. Mr. Wildticker had no interest in surrender. If someone tried to control the narrative, he would tell them exactly what they were doing and with what level of contempt he reserved for a used tissue. If that made the room uncomfortable, that was the room's problem. Comfort was not a right. Accuracy was. Dark line. If the truth offends you, the truth was probably doing its job. Chapter 4. The unknown one speaks. He had spent so long watching the other two that people assumed he was neutral. He was not neutral. He was delayed. There is a difference. He had learned early that reacting too quickly only made the wrong people think they had won. So he waited. He listened. He let Colin calculate and Mr. Wildticker erupt. Then he took note of what remained after both of them had spent themselves. That was where the facts lived. He knew the body carried history like weather. He knew silence could be a strategy or a wound. He knew survival was not the same thing as living. He was the one who had to answer for everything after the moment passed. So he developed a way of seeing that was colder than emotion and more useful than panic. He saw control where others saw care. He saw fear where others saw caution. He saw rage where others saw freedom. And he saw himself, not as a hero, not as a victim, as the one who had to decide what all of it meant. He did not trust people who insisted they knew him after 5 minutes and a hand on the shoulder. He had seen enough false confidence to last several lifetimes. People love to act as though a confident opinion equals insight. It doesn't. Often it just means they're loud enough to drown out the part where they should be listening. The unknown one listened. That was his advantage. He heard the things Colin never said because Colin was too busy preventing disaster. He heard the things Mr. Wildticker said too early, too sharply, because the anger wandered out before the thought had finished forming. He was the one who stood after both of them had spent their energy, and that was where the real work began. He was not there to smooth things over. He was there to make them exact. If someone had lied, he wanted the shape of the lie. If someone had controlled, he wanted the mechanism. If someone had hurt them, he wanted the method and the motive and the aftertaste. Because vague suffering is useful to people who want to dismiss it. Specific suffering makes them uncomfortable enough to stop pretending. Dark line. The calm one is usually the one counting exits. Chapter 5. Safety with teeth in it. Safety is one of the cheapest lies ever sold to damage people. It sounds noble. It sounds responsible. It sounds like somebody finally cares. Sometimes it is real. Most of the time it is administration with better marketing. Colin trusted safety because safety had once kept him from going under. The unknown one understood that. But he also saw what happened when safety became the only value left in the room. It began to shrink the life it was meant to protect. Fewer risks. Fewer choices. Fewer truths. Fewer people are allowed to get close. Soon the cage starts calling itself home. Mr. Wildticker despised that trick immediately. He could smell it a mile off. If someone kept saying for your own good while taking away your voice, he considered that an insult with paperwork attached. The unknown one agreed with both of them, which was irritating, because it meant the answer was not simple. Sometimes safety is protection. Sometimes safety is isolation. Sometimes safety is just the fear of what happens if you stop obeying. There were people in their history who used the language of care like a crowbar. They spoke gently while pushing hard. They called it support while reducing choices. They called it safeguarding while quietly building a wall around someone else's life. This is the part most people do not enjoy hearing because it ruins the clean version they were hoping for. Tough. Reality often ruins the better story. Colin had been trained by experience to stay small in the face of that. Mr. Wildticker wanted to spit in their tea and tip the table over. The unknown one saw both reactions for what they were. Responses to a system that treated being hard to manage as a moral failing. He was not interested in being managed. He was interested in seeing clearly. And clearly, a lot of what got called safety was just control with softer lighting. Dark line. A locked door is only comforting until you realize you are on the wrong side of it. Chapter 6. The argument. Colin, we are safer if we stay small. Mr. Wildticker, we are dead if we keep pretending that's enough. The unknown one let them talk because he had heard it all before. One voice offering caution like medicine. The other offering confrontation like justice. Both were convinced they were saving the whole structure from collapse. Neither one was entirely wrong. Which is the problem with internal war? Every side has a reason. Colin pointed to history. Mr. Wildticker pointed to an insult. The unknown one pointed to the consequence. That changed the terms. Because he was the one who had to live after the argument ended. He was the one who had to walk into the room, answer the question, deal with the aftermath, and carry the cost while the other two kept arguing about principle. Enough. That was the word that finally mattered. Enough hiding. Enough rage without a plan. Enough letting fear and fury make decisions on his behalf. He was not going to be managed by either of them any longer. The fights were not abstract. They showed up in the ordinary places. A message left unsent because Colin said it was safer. A reply was sent too sharply because Mr. Wildticker had had enough of waiting. A silence that lasted too long because the unknown one was tired of cleaning up after both. This was not dramatic from the outside. It was worse than dramatic. It was daily. That is where the real damage lies. Not in the big speeches. In the tiny decisions that slowly make a life smaller or stranger or more survivable than it ought to be. The unknown one was done letting the argument choose the day. If the other two wanted to shout, fine. He had heard louder things than them. But he would not keep handing over the steering wheel just because fear was persuasive and anger was entertaining. Dark line. Internal conflict is just management failing in private. Chapter 7. The people who decide. There are always people who think they know what you need. They arrive with kind faces and hard opinions. They tell you what they see, as though seeing something briefly grants ownership over it. They talk about risk, support, safeguarding, well-being, best interests, and other words that become poisonous when used by people who are not actually listening. The unknown one had seen this too many times to be fooled by the vocabulary. He knew the difference between care and control. He knew the difference between assessment and surveillance. He knew the difference between being heard and being processed. He also knew how quickly a person gets reduced when they are inconvenient. Colin would rather retreat than fight the wrong battle. Mr. Wildticker would rather burn the room down than sit politely inside it. The unknown one had become the only one willing to name what was actually happening. And what was happening was simple. Other people were trying to decide the shape of a life they did not have to live. There is a particular kind of contempt that comes from being treated like a problem to be solved rather than a person with an opinion. It is not loud at first. It arrives in forms, meetings, notes, and careful words. It comes with a smile and a timetable. It tells you it knows better. It wants your compliance and your gratitude. It gets especially irritated if you ask inconvenient questions. The unknown one asked inconvenient questions. What exactly are you afraid of? Who decided that? What happened to the part where I get a say? Why does your concern always end where my control begins? Those are the kinds of questions that make people very serious and very upset because they can feel the room slipping away from them. Good. It should. A life is not a form to be completed by committee. Dark line. Bureaucracy loves a person most when that person stops being one. Chapter 8. The body keeps score. The body does not forget just because people are tired of hearing about it. It keeps the accounts. Every insult. Every dismissal. Every correction. Every lie told with enough confidence to make you wonder if you were the problem. He carried all of it. Not gracefully. Not neatly. He carried it the way stone carries weather, silently, but not without consequence. Colin's caution was written into his posture. Mr. Wildticker's fury was written into his mouth. The unknown one's precision was written into what he did not say unless he had to. Together they made a person who could not be fully reduced, although many had tried. That was the point of the image. Not beauty. Proof. Proof that a body can be split and still function. Proof that fracture is not the same as surrender. Proof that a life can be cracked open and still refuse to collapse. The pain was not always dramatic. That would have been easier to recognize. Often it was just the slow accumulation of strain. The shoulder that never unclenched. The stomach stayed tight. The mind kept replaying the last conversation because it had learned that danger often arrived wearing a familiar face. Colin called it vigilance. Mr. Wildticker called it bullshit. The unknown one called it evidence. And evidence, unlike opinion, does not care who is offended by it. Dark line. Trauma is just memory with bad manners. Chapter 9. The public face. He knew how to behave in public. That did not mean he agreed with public life. The world rewards neatness because neatness looks controllable. It does not reward the truth unless the truth has been edited until it no longer threatens anyone. So the performance becomes necessary. Smile here. Hold back there. Keep the sharp bits under the table. Make yourself easier to tolerate. Colin was excellent at this. Mr. Wildticker despised it. The unknown one saw it for what it was, a survival tax. He knew why people adjusted themselves. He also knew what it cost. Every time he made himself smaller for someone else's comfort, something in him remembered the insult. Every time he stayed quiet to avoid conflict, something in him kept score. So the public face remained, but it no longer got to pretend it was the full story. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly translating yourself into a language other people can handle. Reduce the edge. Remove the pressure. Make the rough part smoother. Make the story less disturbing. Be easier to read. Be less yourself. People call this maturity, which is a lovely lie and a terrible habit. The unknown one watched it happen in real time. He saw the way people preferred the edited version, the acceptable version, the version that did not challenge their assumptions. He knew better than to be impressed. If the public face smiles, good for the public face. It still knows where the teeth are. Dark line. Respectability is often just self-censorship in clean shoes. Chapter 10. The things they call love. Love is another word people misuse while asking you to accept less than you should. They say it when they mean control. They say it when they mean guilt. They say it when they mean obligation. They say it while tightening the boundaries around your life. The unknown one had no patience for that. Colin could understand the fear behind it. Mr. Wildticker could smell the fraud in it. The unknown one understood the harm. If love does not leave room for your truth, it is not love. If care requires you to disappear, it is not care. If the connection only works when one person gives up power, then it was never a connection at all. That is not bitterness. That is accounting. And the accounts had already been paid too many times. Some people wanted loyalty without honesty, closeness without accountability, and care that never had to answer any hard questions. Very convenient. Very common. Also worthless. The unknown one had spent long enough inside systems and relationships to know that the language of affection can be weaponized just as easily as anything else. Sometimes more easily, because people lower their guard when they think they are being loved. That is exactly when the damage gets in. The worst part is how normal it is. The subtle control. The soft pressure. The quiet expectation that you will give more than you receive and call that devotion. Colin got nervous. Mr. Wildticker got furious. The unknown one got cold. Cold is useful when sentiment is being used as a blindfold. Dark line. Some people say they love you the way a fist says it holds a flower. Chapter 11. The refusal. Eventually, the unknown one stopped asking permission. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just decisively. That was the real break. Colin was not pushed aside. Mr. Wildticker was not silenced. But they no longer had automatic authority over the direction of life. They could advise. They could warn. They could rage. They could not rule. The unknown one had become the one who chose. And choice is what frightened other people most, because a person who can choose is a person who cannot be entirely controlled. That changed the tone of everything. He no longer accepted the old story that survival meant shrinking. He no longer accepted the old lie that being difficult was the same as being wrong. He no longer accepted the old arrangement in which other people's comfort mattered more than his reality. The refusal was not dramatic. It was worse. It was final. There are moments when a person realizes that compliance has not brought peace, only delay. That's when the tone shifts. The smile gets thinner. The patience gets rarer. The apology gets deleted before it leaves the mouth. This is not rebellion for entertainment. It is self-respect arriving late but angry. The unknown one was done being edited for the convenience of people who did not have to live with the consequences. If they wanted obedience, they had chosen the wrong body. Dark line. The first act of freedom is often just refusing to apologize for existing. Chapter 12. What remains? After the shouting, after the caution, after the fury, after all the careful interpretations and ugly reversals, what remained was not purity. It was true. Colin remained useful because some dangers really do exist. Mr. Wildticker remained necessary because some lies deserve abuse. The unknown one remained because somebody had to keep the record straight. He knew now that the point was not to destroy the other two. The point was to stop letting either of them steal the whole life. That was hard. That was slow. That was real. The fractured figure in the image still sat there at the water's edge, split but upright, carrying the broken architecture of a self that had not been allowed to rest. It looked like a ruin to people who needed things whole. It looked like survival to the one who had lived it. The unknown one understood now that the whole was overrated anyway. Whole is a word people use when they don't want to deal with the damage. He was more interested in accuracy. Accurate meant fractured but functional. Scarred but standing. Angry but lucid. Defensive but not dead. It meant the story could be told without pretending the body had not paid for every lesson. That was enough. Not peace. Not innocence. Enough. Dark line. Some lives are not built to be healed neatly. Some are built to endure the damage with a straight face. Chapter 13. The One Who Writes. In the end, the unknown one wrote the book because he was the only one who could do it without flinching. Colin would have softened it. Mr. Wildticker would have sharpened it into a weapon. The unknown one kept the edge, kept the facts, kept the bitterness where it belonged, and refused to turn pain into decoration. That was the manuscript. Not therapy. Not redemption. Not a pretty arc. A record. A book of 3. A body of cracks. A life that would not be reduced. He had learned that survival without truth was just a slower form of loss. He had learned that anger without direction was only another prison. He had learned that control, once invited in as protection, can quietly take over the whole house. So he wrote. He wrote the parts people tried to edit. He wrote the parts they called too much. He wrote the parts that were inconvenient because they were real. And when the page ended, he did not ask whether he sounded likable. He asked whether he had told the truth. He had. The job was done. Not cleanly. Not politely. Done. Dark line. In the end, the most dangerous thing he ever did was telling the story straight. Now fuck the fuck off, cunts.